What's up, guys, and welcome back to Why Will Friends English.
Today, we're going to deal with a really common question that we have with our students, which is, when should I use informal English, and when should I avoid using it in speech and writing? Let's give you guys a picture. If we have a spectrum here, we're going to have formal English on one side, and we're going to have slang on the other side. And in the middle, you have informal and semi-formal English. Informal English is the one that you're going to use most often with your friends and your family and everyday English conversation.
Right.
And it all has to do with perspective.
So a large part of informal English is that you are focused on communicating your meaning more than trying to understand the other people's meaning.
But if you're using formal English, you're really, really concerned with how polite you are coming across, how respectfully you are coming across, whether that person feels honored or respected by the way that you're speaking to them. You're trying not to really bother them. You're trying not to waste their time. But informal English, you're not worried about that. You're with your friends. You're with your family. So you can just speak. You can just communicate. And so perspective is a big difference on where you're going to be in this spectrum. Some characteristics of informal English are that you're using contractions, you have more simplified grammar structures, you're using a lot of idioms and picture language. You're going to also use more like laid back terms like gonna and dunno. Your pronunciation is going to come down.
Paralanguage is going to be a lot more colorful, a lot more expressive sometimes. If you're with maybe your best friend, maybe it actually gets a little muted instead of it being so expressive, just because when I talk to my wife, I don't normally use big, bubbly paralanguage. But sometimes. But when I'm talking with my friends, normally I'm trying to have a good time. I'm trying to relax, and so more animated body language comes out. Informal English, as opposed to formal English, is about context. Yes. Where is the context? What context do you find yourself in?
The key concept here in this video that we're going to explore is when should you use informal language and when shouldn't you? So a good time to use informal body language is with your family and your friends.
Even though native English speakers may not pick up on it, it's a difference between the context. So I talk differently with my family than I do with an employer. I talk differently with my friends than I do my landlord. These are the kind of contexts that you can speak informal English, friends, family, acquaintances.
And when you're writing, this is where I think most people get tripped up here, because when you can see the other person's body language, you know, okay, I can be really relaxed, or, I should be a lot more respectful here. Right. Well, when you're writing, this is the key difference, because when you are texting or instant messaging of some sort, or if you are sending a casual email or writing a casual blog post, you're going to use more informal English. However, when you're writing more of a business email, then you're going to be a little bit more formal. But within one business context, you might see a range of different types of English used. If you're speaking to a manager or a boss, you're likely going to use more formal English. If you have a coworker who prefers to use formal English, you're likely going to respond in more formal English. If you're going to text to your coworkers, like on Slack or some kind of instant messaging program, then you are likely going to just use more informal English. But you are also going to have more casual or semi-formal language in your business emails to one another. Just know that there's different levels and there's different situations, especially in writing, that this is really going to show up. And that's where a lot of you guys have had questions.
A lot of people will try to simplify the informal and formal problem context to make it to say, well, in emails, you always have to use formal language.
But to whom it may concern.
Yeah, but that's not true. When I send an email to my wife, if we're separated from a far distance, I don't do that. And so you really have to pay attention to who you're talking to, who's the audience, and what kind of context is that. So if I'm messaging some people, if I'm messaging a new student or a potential customer, I might be a little bit more formal. But if I'm messaging a coworker that I've worked with for a long time about something small, like, hey, are you going to join the softball team? I'm not going to use a super formal. I might not even use a heading. I'm not going to say, John, comma, are you going to participate in the softball league? Love, Josh. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, are you going to join the softball team? Question mark. That's it.
So when are you specifically not supposed to use informal language? Anytime that you are writing or speaking formally or publicly, you are going to use either semi-formal or formal language. And that really depends on the context and what the purpose of the speech is for. When you are writing an email, if you're writing to a boss, you should write more formally for sure, unless they initiate speaking more semi-formally or informally with you. By and large, this is very much a monkey see, monkey do situation where whatever your context is, some people within that context are going to prefer more formality than others. You might have a boss that says, hey, just call me John. Okay, but you also might have a coworker that says, my name is Mr. Stiles. Okay, so you've got to be very particular and pay attention. You've got to be very alert what those around you prefer, because even we do this. I will refer to somebody as Mr. or Mrs. if they tell me if they introduce themselves to me that way. Or if other people, if everyone else around me references them like that, then I should probably follow suit. There's going to be a reason for that that's going to be much more apparent as time goes on.
The decision to use informal English in your speaking or writing versus formal English in your speaking or writing comes down to who is the audience and what is the context. So if you see that the context is more informal, or you see that other people are speaking more informal, then you have the green light to go ahead and participate in informal speech. But if it's more formal and you see that, you need to be aware and change your English accordingly.
Right. Either way, it is far better to start out semi-formally or formally and be told, hey, we don't do that here. You can chill a little bit. That is far better than for you to accidentally offend somebody by saying, hey bro, what's up, man? Okay, that's not okay. You don't want to just walk in doing that in a business setting in particular. Now, with people that you meet at school or situations where you're meeting each other on the street or in a business where you are the customer, it might be more appropriate to do that because you have more of a right to. But if you are meeting somebody over you in authority for the first time, you really shouldn't start out by being super informal. A key thing that I really want to say here in terms of writing is no matter what you do, always write concisely. Always write concisely and with grammatical correctness. There are plenty of coworkers, if you work in America, who will not do this or they won't do it well. And honestly, culturally, it reflects poorly on them to do so. So just make sure that you don't have to have fancy grammar. Just make it to the point, concise, and correct. That's all you really have to do. And using informal language, reserve that mainly for text in a business context.
So a lot of people will ask the question, does informal English mean friendliness? Like if I go up to a person and I immediately initiate in informal English, does that mean that I'm trying to be more friendly or that is more friendly?
No, unfortunately not. Mainly that can come across as what we would call like cheeky, like you're way too overconfident and thinking that you can just step in and speak to somebody as a friend when you really don't know them. A lot of times in situations we might perceive that to be like really cheeky or very sarcastic, or it could be mocking. So honestly, it would just be better to start out in more semi-formal way or listen to the way a person introduces you to someone. Typically informal is okay in a person-to-person context, but if we're talking about business, I would stick with semi-formal at least until you get a feel for the situation.
Yeah.
One of the main things that I really want to make a note in terms of whether it's friendly or not to use informal speech, remember that messaging has no tone. There is no body language. They do not see your smiling face. So if you make a joke or if you act like write something in irony or sarcasm, they have no context and it might just come across as rude. So definitely, even if Americans to Americans can do that, then you definitely could as an ESL learner. So make sure that you recognize that writing is tone deaf. And you have no body language to make your meaning more clear. So better be on the safe side.
So there you go, guys. We know that to try to tell the difference of how to use informal versus formal English is tough. And one thing that we want you guys to know is both are correct ways to use English.
Absolutely.
But the question is maybe sometimes you should be on the more formal side and sometimes you should be on the more informal side.
Here in the future, we're going to have a few more videos coming out on when to use formal terms and what informal terms you should stop using because they're just overused, things like that that are just moving on in as English evolves. And so we're going to have some more videos coming down the pipeline here shortly of more context for you guys to understand when to know and use informal English. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.